They told Princess Diana that no one would testify on her behalf. The royal lawyers sat across from her, smiling as they presented evidence that she was a difficult employer who drove staff away with her erratic behavior. With William and Harry beside her, watching their mother be accused of mistreating the very people who'd served her loyally, Diana had no choice but to listen to the lies. But what the palace didn't know was that for 18 months, Diana had been quietly tracking down every staff member who'd left royal service, and 40 of them had signed sworn statements telling a very different story about who the difficult employer really was. The October rain streaked down the windows of the solicitor's office in Mayfair. Diana sat perfectly still in a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. Across the polished table sat 3 royal lawyers, their expressions professionally sympathetic in a way that made Diana's skin crawl. Behind them, palace HR representatives held thick folders. This was the character assessment meeting, part of the ongoing divorce settlement negotiations. They'd already stripped away her title and security. Now they were systematically destroying her reputation to justify giving her as little as possible. William sat to her left, 19 years old and barely containing his rage. Harry, 17, kept his eyes fixed on the lawyers with open contempt. Diana had begged them not to come, but William had been adamant. "They're lying about you, Mum. We're not letting them do it without witnesses." Sir Richard Pemberton, the lead palace lawyer, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Spencer, we need to address concerns about your conduct as an employer during your time as Princess of Wales." Diana's stomach tightened. Here it came. "We have documentation," Sir Richard continued, sliding a folder across the table, "from multiple former staff members describing a challenging work environment, erratic behavior, unreasonable demands, emotional volatility that made it difficult for staff to perform their duties." Diana opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were anonymous statements, no names, just positions. Former lady's maid, former private secretary, former protection officer. Each one painted her as unstable, demanding, impossible to work with. "This is anonymous," Diana said quietly. "These people aren't named." "For their protection," Gerald Hartley from Palace HR interjected smoothly. "Many former staff fear retaliation if they speak publicly about their experiences working for you." "Retaliation from whom?" William demanded. "From my mother, who has no power or resources? Or from the palace that still employs most of these people?" Sir Richard ignored him. "The point, Mrs. Spencer, is that there's a pattern. Multiple staff members left your employment citing the same issues. It speaks to a character concern relevant to settlement, negotiations." Diana felt sick. They were using anonymous accusations to paint her as an abusive employer, and she had no way to defend herself because she couldn't even identify who was supposedly making these claims. "How many statements?" she asked. 7, Sir Richard replied, "from staff across different time periods and different roles. The consistency is quite striking." 7 anonymous accusations from former staff who'd probably been pressured or paid by the palace to provide these statements or who didn't even exist. 7 lies that would follow her forever. "This is character assassination," Harry said, his voice shaking. "Harry, please," Diana said softly. She looked at Sir Richard. "What do you want?" "We want you to acknowledge that your conduct contributed to a hostile work environment, that you accept responsibility for driving away qualified staff through your behavior." They wanted her to confess to being a bad person, to accept their characterization of her as unstable and abusive, to internalize the lie so thoroughly that she'd never have the confidence to challenge them on anything else. "I need time to consider this," Diana said. "You have until Friday," Sir Richard replied. "If we don't receive your signed acknowledgement by then, these statements will be submitted as evidence in any contested settlement proceedings." As they left the office, William was shaking with fury. "They're lying. Your staff loved you." "Not everyone," Diana said quietly. "Some did leave. Some didn't get along with me. I wasn't perfect." "But this? Anonymous accusations that you can't even challenge? This is designed to destroy you." "That's exactly what it's designed to do," Diana agreed. That evening, Diana sat in her Kensington Palace study staring at the anonymous statements. Each one was carefully worded to sound credible while providing no specific details that could be verified or challenged. Rosa Martinez found her there at midnight. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. They have 7 anonymous statements calling me a terrible employer. I have—" "What?" "My own word that I wasn't. Who's going to believe me?" "The people who actually worked for you would believe you." Diana looked up. What? Your real staff? The people who actually served you for years? They'd tell the truth about what you were like as an employer. Most of them still work for the palace. They'd never risk their jobs to defend me. But some don't work there anymore, Rosa pressed. Some retired, some moved to other positions. What if you found them? What if you asked them to tell the truth? Diana felt something stir, a small spark of hope. You think anyone would actually testify for me? I think you were a good employer to good people. I think if you asked them, some would tell the truth. But you'd have to ask. Over the next week, Diana made a list. Every staff member who'd worked directly for her during her marriage, ladies' maids, private secretaries, protection officers, housekeepers, drivers, administrative assistants. She wrote down names from memory, cross-referenced with old schedules and photographs. The list grew to 73 people. Then she began the slow, careful work of tracking them down. Some were still in royal service. She couldn't approach them, but others had retired, moved to private sector positions, left Britain entirely. Diana hired a private researcher to help locate them. One by one, Diana reached out. A letter, a phone call, a quiet meeting in a cafe far from palace eyes. Each time she explained what was happening. The palace was using anonymous accusations to paint her as an abusive employer, and she wanted to know if anyone would be willing to tell the truth. Margaret Hughes, her former housekeeper, was first. Anonymous statements. Diana, you were the kindest employer I ever had. You remembered my daughter's name, sent flowers when my husband was ill. I'd testify in court. That first statement gave Diana courage. She contacted Paul Burrell, James Mitchell, Maria Santos. Each conversation was the same: shock, anger, and willingness to tell the truth. Not everyone agreed. Some feared palace retaliation, but more agreed than she'd dared hope. 6 months in, Diana had 23 statements, but she kept going, expanding to palace staff who'd interacted with her regularly. Paul Burrell and Margaret Hughes connected her with others who'd left royal service. A network formed, people tired of lies, wanting truth told. 18 months after that first meeting, Diana had 40 signed and sworn statements. The statements told a very different story than the palace version. They described Diana as thoughtful, appreciative, sometimes stressed, but always apologetic when that stress affected staff. They described the immense pressure she'd been under, the impossible expectations, the complete lack of support from the institution that was now accusing her of being difficult. More importantly, several statements described what working for Charles had been like. The affairs conducted openly in front of staff who were expected to lie and cover. The way Camilla was given unofficial status and access, while Diana was isolated. The palace's systematic undermining of Diana while protecting Charles from any accountability. Diana sat in her study looking at 40 thick folders, each containing a detailed sworn statement. This was her defense. This was the truth. But she'd kept it completely secret, telling no one except Rosa. The settlement deadline was approaching. Sir Richard had called twice, reminding her to sign the acknowledgement. She'd stalled each time, saying she needed more time to consider. Finally, Diana called Sir Richard. I'd like one more meeting before I sign anything. Just me, you, and one palace representative. I have something to discuss. Sir Richard sounded pleased. He thought she was surrendering. Of course. Thursday at 2 p.m.? Perfect. When Diana walked into Sir Richard's office Thursday afternoon, she carried only a large leather portfolio. Sir Richard and Gerald Hartley stood as she entered, their expressions professionally sympathetic. Mrs. Spencer, Sir Richard began, I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable about this. If you've brought the signed acknowledgement, I haven't. Diana interrupted quietly. She sat down, placing the portfolio on the table but not opening it. I'm here to discuss your 7 anonymous accusations about my conduct as an employer. There's nothing to discuss, Gerald said smoothly. The statements speak for themselves. Do they? 7 anonymous accusations about how difficult I was to work with? We've been through this. The staff need anonymity to protect them from what? Diana interrupted. From me? A woman with no power, no position, no ability to affect their careers? Or from the palace that still controls their employment prospects? Sir Richard frowned. Mrs. Spencer, where is this going? Diana opened the portfolio and pulled out a document. Margaret Hughes, my former housekeeper. 8 years of service. Sworn statement willing to testify. She slid it across. Sir Richard read it, discomfort growing. Another document. James Mitchell, protection officer, 7 years. Another. Paul Burrell, butler, 12 years. Diana kept pulling out documents, laying them on the table one by one. 40 people total. 40 real names, real signatures, real sworn testimony. Everyone contradicting your 7 anonymous accusations. The color drained from Sir Richard's face. 40 statements, Diana continued, her voice still calm, but carrying steel underneath. Not anonymous. Not hidden behind position titles. Real names, real signatures, real sworn testimony. Every one of them contradicting your 7 anonymous accusations. Every one of them describing a very different employer than the one you tried to create. How did you, Gerald stammered. I found them. Contacted every staff member who'd worked for me. 18 months. Most agreed to tell the truth despite fearing palace retaliation. Diana pulled out more documents. These don't just describe me. Several describe what working at the palace was really like. The affairs staff were expected to cover for. How I was isolated and undermined. The systematic campaign to paint me as difficult while protecting Charles. Sir Richard read one and went pale. These described Charles's relationship with Camilla, conducted openly in front of staff. Staff instructed to lie to me about his schedule. Palace officials undermining me while supporting his affair. Those are serious accusations, Sir Richard started. They're sworn testimony from credible witnesses, Diana corrected, just like you claim to have. Except mine aren't anonymous. Mine are willing to testify in court, willing to face cross-examination, willing to put their credibility on the line. Can your 7 anonymous sources say the same? The silence in the room was deafening. Here's what's going to happen, Diana said, her voice quiet but absolutely firm. You're going to withdraw every anonymous accusation about my conduct as an employer. You're going to admit those 7 statements were either fabricated or coerced, and then we're going to renegotiate the entire settlement, because now we both know that if this goes to court, 40 staff members will testify about what really happened during my marriage. You're threatening to— I'm not threatening anything, Diana interrupted. I'm explaining reality. You tried to paint me as an abusive employer using anonymous lies. I've proven it's a lie using named, verifiable testimony. You tried to destroy my credibility. I've shown that 40 people who actually worked with me will vouch for my character. Gerald found his voice. If those statements about the Prince of Wales become public, then people will know the truth about who was really difficult to work with during my marriage, about who was conducting affairs in front of staff, about who the palace was really protecting. Diana met his eyes. I don't want to make this public, but I will if you force me to defend myself against lies. She gathered the documents back into her portfolio, all except the first few she'd shown them. You can keep those, read them. Share them with whoever needs to understand the situation. I have copies of everything, stored in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to the originals, copies go to the press immediately. Deanna stood. You have until Friday at 5 p.m., your favorite deadline. Either I have a withdrawal of all accusations about my conduct as an employer, or 40 witnesses start giving interviews to every media outlet in Britain. Your choice. She walked out, leaving 2 stunned lawyers staring at the statements on the table. That evening, Rosa found Diana shaking in her study, the adrenaline finally wearing off. You did it? You actually did it. I showed them the statements. Now we wait to see if they call my bluff. It's not a bluff. You have 40 witnesses. I have 40 people willing to tell the truth, but taking on the palace publicly would destroy their lives. I'm hoping the palace is too afraid of that happening to call my bluff. Friday morning, Sir Richard called. His voice was carefully controlled. Mrs. Spencer, the palace has reviewed the materials you provided. We acknowledge that the anonymous statements regarding your conduct as an employer were not properly substantiated. We are withdrawing them from settlement considerations. Diana felt her knees weaken with relief. And we'd like to discuss revised settlement terms. The palace believes a more generous arrangement would be appropriate. How generous? We're prepared to triple our initial financial offer, full annual budget for your charitable activities, no restrictions on your public statements, and a formal acknowledgement that your service to the Crown over 15 years was valuable and appreciated. Diana closed her eyes. It was more than she'd dared hope. "I want it in writing by end of business today." "Of course." After hanging up, Diana sat very still. 18 months of work, 40 people willing to tell the truth. And the palace had backed down completely rather than face those witnesses in court or in public. 2 weeks later, Prince Edward appeared at Kensington Palace. He looked uncomfortable in a way Diana had never seen. "Diana, the family wanted me to acknowledge that mistakes were made in how the settlement negotiations were conducted." "Mistakes?" Diana repeated. "Is that what we're calling lying about my character with anonymous accusations?" "We believed we had credible sources. We were mistaken about the reliability of those sources." "You made them up," Diana said bluntly. "Or you pressured current staff into giving statements they didn't believe, counting on the fact that I'd have no way to prove otherwise. You didn't expect me to spend 18 months tracking down 40 former staff members and getting them to tell the truth." Edward didn't deny it. "How did you even find them all?" "I made a list. I hired a researcher. I reached out personally. I asked them to tell the truth, and most of them agreed because they were tired of the lies." Diana leaned forward. "Here's what you didn't understand. I was a good employer to good people. Not perfect, but considerate and appreciative. When you tried to paint me as abusive, the people who'd actually worked for me were willing to stand up and say, that was a lie. You counted on them being too afraid. You were wrong. The statements about the Prince of Wales's affairs, the statements describing palace operations, those are very sensitive." "Those are very truthful," Diana corrected. 40 people willing to testify about what they witnessed, about affairs conducted openly, about me being systematically undermined while Charles was protected, about the palace choosing to support his affair rather than support his marriage. That's the truth you didn't want told." "If those statements became public, they won't," Diana said. "Not unless you force me to use them. I got what I wanted. Fair settlement, no lies about my character, acknowledgement of my service. I have no interest in destroying Charles's reputation, but I kept those statements, Edward. Safely stored, properly witnessed, ready to be used if anyone ever tries to attack my character again." After Edward left, Diana pulled out the 40 folders one more time. Each one represented hours of conversation, careful documentation, someone choosing to tell the truth despite risk. Each one was evidence that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask people to tell the truth and trust that enough of them will. Years later, several of those statements would be referenced in biographies and documentaries about Diana's life, providing counter-narrative to palace spin. The truth about what working for her had really been like, described by people who'd actually been there. The reality of the affairs and undermining, documented by witnesses who'd seen it firsthand. The lawyers who'd sat across from her with 7 anonymous accusations thought they'd crushed any defense she might have. They'd underestimated the power of truth told by named witnesses willing to stake their reputations on their statements. They'd assumed she was powerless and isolated. They'd forgotten that 40 people who'd worked with her knew better, and some of them were willing to say so. Sometimes the greatest weapon against institutional lies isn't legal maneuvering or media spin. Sometimes it's just the patient, careful work of finding people who know the truth and asking them to tell it.